My communication is pretty close to the previous speaker's subject. It also pertains to the range of political discourses available in existence in Armenia. In this respect, I would like to start, for example, the role of the media in our society. The media, according to common perception, are a series of newscasts, talk shows, and broadcasts that reproduce our ideas about the world, imposing a certain value structure. The media messages are viewed as social action, as a major leverage for the authorities, and an important incarnation of ideology. In Armenia, the media break down into pro-government and opposition. The latter have more critical material than the former, but from the discourse perspective, there may be little difference between them. If we break them down by genres of discourse, if we take, for example, how the opposition and pro-government media cover, let's say, culture, we will not be able to detect any differences. Very often, all of the media outlets use some sort of a consensual median language. That is, they refer to the formalistic legal language when they have to cover infringements or transgressions and similar events. Within the last decade, significant changes in the political discourse are not contested by any scholar. First and foremost, it's the full decline of the liberal ideology in the entire post-Soviet space and the rise in anti-elitist sentiment. In Armenia, as elsewhere in the region, anti-systemic activism is on the rise. In the political competition, the networking and media acquire an increasing role. One of the most important factors is the crisis of the political party system. In particular, the emergence of parties around any pretext, such as the Republican Party or the Единая Россия. Institutionally, personal ideology is defeated because in the parliamentary elections of 2017, the liberal parties are no longer represented in our parliament. It's another thing altogether that, for example, the rhetoric of lawfulness and legitimacy are shared both by the opposition, the authorities, and the civil society. Why is liberalism experiencing a crisis? Let me answer that before I move to populism. Boris Kuprianov says that the self-regulation postulate has already become unacceptable. There are ethical and other reasons to deny it. There are no economic or social grounds for it. The liberal opposition simply acts ad obversam. When we talk about liberal discourse, this is not only the opposition we speak about, but also and mainly the CSOs. But one has to notice that this discourse is also getting eroded. The British researcher Armenia Ishkhanyan made a very interesting observation. If we clarify, the civic initiatives are different from the officially registered specialized NGOs in a number of important factors. The decision-making practices are different, the strategies and the arsenal of activities are different. They refuse foreign financing and they do not rely on foreign assistance. This doesn't mean that they have no links to other with the NGOs. Quite the opposite. The NGO staff often assist with their capacity these civic initiatives. It's an interesting divide that exists between the NGOs and the civic initiatives and their respective ideologies, which may seemingly seem only functional. The function of the NGO is to bridge the authorities and the society through public discussions and consultations within the four corners of the law, through using the TV or other media. That is not in the open space, maybe even in confined spaces they do this. I would like to say that, of course, in Armenia, I have already reflected on the conservative ideology, but I believe an ideological analysis also matters and is very important. I will now move on to populism. The discourse of populism, which, as it was already mentioned, is an empty nominator, which by different players in the political scene may be filled with their own content and meaning. Such actual notions, of course, include the points where we may speak about hegemony. Armen Ghazaryan and Arlina Pogosyan, in their keynotes called Populism and Propaganda in Armenia, write the following. Populism and propaganda in Armenia are often linked to the subjects of nationalism and poverty. Populism and propaganda in Armenia impede with the democratization of internal processes, good governance, as well as foreign policy relations with Russia and EU. Establishing a healthy dialogue there at. On the one hand, they exploit the popular emotions. On the other hand, they lean not on facts and well-reasoned recommendations, but simply on denial, emphasizing the unlawful and immoral aspects and facets of authority. Artak Alexanyan in New Mag writes, populism is not solely an Armenian phenomenon. It's fashionable in the global politics. It was the major trend in 2016, which scored in almost every continent significant successes. According to him, there are weeks left on the eve of the elections, and it's already clear that the mottos of the campaigns will be extremely populist. They're addressing dumb people's interest, exploiting and appealing to their primitive instincts. The Armenian media within the last 2 years, in respect of 2017 parliamentary elections, as well as, for example, human rights organizations' impact, as well as the World Bank and other important international organizations, have been paying great attention. In particular, one may say, the populism subject was related and anchored to this.
Here's how it was characterizing certain political forces, populists, in reference to the Tsarukyan Alliance, Armenian Renaissance, and the Ohanyan-Rafioskanyan Alliance. Here's Hayot's Ashkar daily and a few headlines. Free Democrats also affected by populism. We shall not engage in populism. A ghost in the Armenian world, the populism ghost. Pre-electoral populist mood. Populism is not relevant here. Not populist, but realistic solutions. Populism doesn't have to be stupid. Worse than populism is dysfunctional populism only. Dozens of articles against populism were written by Ara Abrahamian, editor of Aravot. Irates Daily's website search for populism rendered about 70 results since 2010. Here's an example of the parliament debate, luragir.am, which is only 10 points beyond Irates Daily. Irates is a daily, so it's anti-populistic. Populist and demagogue is who you are. The Republican Tsarukyan Alliance was accused of populism. Naira Zorabian, member of parliament, is worried, saying one cannot speak of populism being involved in demagogy. You're populist, you're in demagogy. When we ask you what's cheaper, you say, we propose inflation hearings. Using this situation, essential commodities prices have gone up in the market. Former Prime Minister Karin Karapetyan had an interesting meeting with journalists where he said, today's life is such that pragmatism, rational thinking, and staying away from populism are necessary, and they should be rules of life. You can be the best campaigners. If you wish to do so, you will have the greatest impact on this field. The government is very keen to build new rules of communication with the media world. These publications show that, like the conservative Republican Party as well as the opposition liberal media had consensus on populism. And the explanation of populism could serve as an example of hegemony. I'd like to start off by speaking about the approaches of Chantal Rousseau and Ernesto something on populism, because I think Irates Daily writes in the 2017 election, Yelk was not being populistic because the author likes the Yelk alliance, so it describes it as a good party, which is not populistic. Chantal Mohn's theory is constructivist. If you analyze their approach to populism, they describe populism by the substance of the entities involved. The subject theory of Laclau in his articles on populism, they characterize the political movements not as substance populistic, but as articulation logic populistic. The theory of Laclau on populism starts with a unit below 1, which he calls demand. It is smaller than the individual, which is used in liberal thinking, and smaller than the group. The word demand, according to Laclau, can mean need as well as complaint, protest. It can have these two connotations. A group of citizens demands pavement in the streets, others demand rights of minorities, and some others yet environmental demands. Sometimes the authorities grant these demands, and in other cases they don't. These are ad hoc demands that do not create a schism in the social organism. Laclau calls these democratic entities. But when the refusal of demands becomes the government's strategy, there's another logic of political articulation. The institution, reviewing the demands of the authorities, reviews each demand individually, and it has positive substance. These unmet demands can gain negative logic. And there's on this negative foundation a chain of adequacy. The adequacy chain contains no longer any satisfaction of the demands. This is the baseline for populistic articulation. The entity is wider than the subjectivity, which produces the articulated adequacy for democracy. But Laclau calls the entity a democratic entity. And on the contrary, the group, such as the environment, also which have environmental claims to the institution, are called by Laclau the democratic entity. Because the procedure for making these claims is a democratic one. The popular entity cannot exist if the internal boundary does not exist. The adequacy chain shows that when these demands are not met, it becomes necessary to determine what is the source of frustration. The popular discourse of adequacy divides the social into two parts: authorities and the deprived or disenfranchised whose demands were not met. At such time, the grievance becomes complaint, and the word demand gains a second meaning. There's an internal boundary on the other side of which stand the oligarchic power. The institutional political discourse is syntagmatic. There are different social or political positions. The populist logic is paradigmatic because it's in the logic of adequacy and it only has syntagma. It's us versus the oligarchs. Another partial demand, such as reject Serge, becomes a symbol for the adequacy chain, becomes the hegemonic sign. The wider it is, the poorer it is, until it becomes vain, empty, and a symbol that can be explained differently by each group of the disenfranchised. The example of adequacy was seen in April. The participants were not only the disenfranchised, those who were economically or socially disenfranchised, but many rich people also participated. Many celebrities, actors, singers, all participated, and that means when a famous actor participates, their deprivation is equal to the deprivation of those who can barely get by, although clearly they are very different. So the wider it is, the poorer it is, but it's necessary to remain poor because there's a white and popular alliance. I think this is enough for us to understand that Nikol Pashinyan and Civil Contract are a populistic party. Chantal Mouffe characterizes the populist movement. He says the lefts and the liberals deny the existence of emotions in politics. Everything must be rational and pragmatic. Chantal Mouffe and Lacan say that thus emotions are left to the nationalists, and the space for emotions is another space for struggle. And Chantal Mouffe proposes creating an inclusive, democratic and progressive patriotism, which would then enable to struggle within that patriotic space with the rights and the nationalists. And I want to draw some parallels between Laclau's internal agonal democracy theory, internal boundary theory, and the political movements in Belsarksian's theory. He also underlines the existence of an internal boundary for the victory of the revolution. He says in particular why the post-electoral process cannot lead to a change of government. Every party is a particular demand, as it is a party, a part. Therefore it cannot unite the party under the paradigm of us versus them. It also has to do, and I'm sorry, I should have said this, Chantal Mouffe also says that a left populist leader doesn't have to be courageous. Chantal Mouffe is now saying that the left and the liberal progressives are covering up under the flag of rationalism. They're just cowards. And most importantly, Laclau says you should define populism according to the prevalence of the logic of adequacy, the production of empty symbols, the establishment of internal boundaries. It's obvious that discourse based on this logic of articulation can emerge in any part of the social institutional domain, be it the clientist political organization, an established political party, trade unions, army, revolutionary movements, and the like. Populism characterizes their current policy, the methods of articulation of these topics, whatever they may be. All the political movements are, to a greater or lesser extent, populistic. Populism is especially relevant, and it undermines the future of society. The future of populism depends on the disruption of the political alternatives, which is obvious in Armenia. Thank you.